Today's video is the setup process for a Wilbert Continental. It's also a safety video. Today is my first day with the new Johnny handler from True Rebel Equipment. And within the first 5 minutes I told myself I need to slow down and get acquainted with this new piece of equipment. It might be identical to the same model that I've been using for the past 8 months or so, but it's brand new and some things work a lot better and some things are just slightly different. But as with any committal service setup, our first step is to create a stable platform for the burial vault to sit above the grave. We do this by setting down 4x4s with planks underneath to disperse the weight of the vault, and then we use aluminums and wood boards on the outer edges of the grave where our equipment will sit. We leave 2 boards in the middle for the vault to sit on as we add our feet, our cables, and the vault swinging equipment. I use aluminum boards on the front side where I will be walking and where the family will place flowers, and I use wood boards on the back side. Since the wood boards have a bit more bounce to them than the aluminum, I place them where the lid will be covering them in between the base and the lid. But now it's time to get acquainted with my new piece of equipment. And I'll be upfront and clear, any issues I had today was strictly because of user error. This Johnny handler is an absolutely fantastic piece of equipment, and the few small changes that were made from our last handler make this device even easier to use. So we first remove our straps. Each of the straps that we use to hold down the vault are rated at 4,000 pounds, so it's more than enough structure to keep this vault in place during transport, and we can go ahead and extend our boom. One thing I really like about this handler is that the winch itself has a lock that attaches it to the boom. So rather than having a chain that reaches around the vault and underneath the device, the winch clamp can be tightened down and the harness can stay attached to the winch in transit. Once the boom is fully extended, we can find the spot on the harness where the vault lifts up in a level manner. And here's where I ran into my first problem. On my other buggy, it definitely had some mileage on it and everything was a lot more stiff. So the way that this winch rolls out so easily is something that I wasn't used to. On this vault, we're going to spot where the trademark indentation goes on the foot into the grave. We will turn the vault to that side and begin to line it up over the grave itself. And here's what made me just a little bit nervous during the setup process. The cable that is spooled up into the winch is long enough to reach the bottom of the grave. And since it's a brand new cable, I failed to check to make sure that the cable didn't have any excess slack or areas where the cable was overlapping with the rest of the reel. When it was lowered enough to release the slack, the vault dropped around 6 inches, bouncing on the platform. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt, the vault wasn't hurt, and the equipment wasn't hurt. So it's a little bit of a frightful learning experience for me. I've never actually used a buggy that has a brand new cable attached, so I definitely need to keep that in mind on my further setups. For this grave, there was a headstone at one end and a tree at the other, so I had to do what we call a side shot. Once the vault has been placed down, we need to raise the boom up over the vault and drive the vault cart away. The winch on the front of the buggy raises the boom, and the hydraulic wheel on the front can be raised and lowered to help get those boom legs up over the top of the vault. And this is where I made my third mistake for the day. I forgot that this buggy has hydraulic controls that are set up just a bit different from my last buggy I used, where the handle for the front wheel to raise and lower is set up backwards from my last buggy. So as I drove the buggy forward, I needed to lower that front wheel more, but instead I dropped it down and the legs from the buggy caught on the edge of the vault. Luckily I was able to just reverse it a hair and raise those legs up over the top of the vault. No harm, no foul, but if I wouldn't have seen that I did that, I ran the risk of either tipping over the entire vault or damaging the lid. So if I could go back in time today and redo this setup, I'll probably take just a couple extra minutes and make sure that everything is in perfect working order and that I'm more familiar with my equipment. But now that the vault is safe and sound, we can release the boom lock and close down this Johnny handler. Once I put the lock pins in and get this vault ready for transport, I want to take a look at the winch and make sure that there's still not a lot of slack left. The last thing I would want would be to be lowering a vault to the bottom of the grave and have it drop even farther than it did on today's setup. Anytime you're working with brand new equipment, whether you've used a different model in the past before, it's best to take plenty of time, look over everything, cross your T's, and dot your I's to make sure that you're safe and that none of the equipment or the vault that we use gets damaged. But as I said before, this was not the fault of the equipment, it was entirely user error. Now that the buggy is locked down and ready for transport, I need to add my extra long wood boards that I keep in my truck for graves that are caved in. These boards are used under a more rare circumstance, so I want to attach them to the side of the buggy where they'll be off my truck and out of the way of all my other equipment. It's really important for us vaultmen to keep plenty of boards on the truck, just in case the grave's caving in, or if we're on a hillside and we need to raise one end of the platform up substantially higher. But for now, we can place this buggy out of the way for the service and get ready to swing this Wilbert Continental. Wilbert Continentals can be painted in two different colors, the base color and then the highlight color. This veteran blue and silver color is one that we do quite often. The entire base, the small portion of the lid, and the top of the lid all have a textured pattern, and we use a sponge soaked in the paint of the highlight color to brush along the side of the vault and give it that two-tone textured appearance. Wilbert Continentals also come with 6 decorative handles that really give an elegant look to the cover of the vault. To suspend a burial vault over the grave, we use equipment that are referred to as feet. These feet go around each end of the vault, and cables are reeled onto the feet on an even pattern on each end. We can then use a one-man bar to attach the 2 sets of feet together so that when the vault is cranked up on one end, both ends lift at the exact same rate and lower at the exact same rate. And just like with our buggy, it's important that we release all the slack out of the cable lines once they're reeled onto the equipment. If not, one side of the vault will lift up slightly higher and the vault will appear unlevel. When using a buggy, I reel my cables 8 times on each end, and we can go ahead and lift the vault off the base. When using a hill joy to set the vault over the grave, there's one extra step, where the vault needs to be raised up off the blocks that were used to remove the hill joy before the spacing can be placed in between the feet and the vault, and before we make sure that our lines are straight down, our carpets are pulled tight, and the feet are also centered around the vault. This ensures that the vault will lift up straight and that the vault doesn't slide over above one of the sets of aluminum boards or wood boards, preventing the vault from clearing the sides and entering the grave. We can now use the one-man bar to lift the entire vault up and make sure that our reels stay straight, our vault doesn't shift to either side or to either end, and that the pressure from cranking the feet doesn't wrinkle up our carpets. After that, it'll be time to install the equipment that we use to separate the lid from the base and display the base and the lid at the same time in a fashion that's referred to as the Wilbert way. The Wilbert way is my preferred method of displaying a vault. In my opinion, it's substantially better than placing the vault base into the bottom of the grave and leaving the lid off to the side. If the family chooses custom options for their burial vault, like the color, the highlight color, the nameplate, the emblem, or if they chose a vault like a Wilbert stainless steel triune, where the interior of the vault is lined with stainless steel, it's my opinion that the family should be able to view that vault in full display when they arrive at the cemetery. With the Wilbert way setup, the vault is suspended in the air above the grave, to where around 8 inches of the base are showing above the boards on the sides, and the interior of the vault is also visible. The lid is displayed in full view as well, being suspended on rails, and it slides back right behind the base. To achieve that look, we use the lid rails and the lid carriers. The lid carriers clamp on to the burial vault lid, and when it's lowered, the wheels on the carriers catch the lid rails. And since the lid rails are attached to the feet, the weight of the burial vault being suspended by cables from the feet is what keeps the lid rails from flipping over backwards. So in turn, the entire inside of the base and part of the exterior of the base is visible, and the entire lid is visible as well. This also means that when a vaultman like myself goes to seal the vault in front of the family, he can be sure that the lid is aligned perfectly over the base, and the family may even inspect the seal themselves if they would like to. The seal on a Wilbert vault is installed before the pouring process even begins, so the interior liner will be flipped upside down in the shop, and the seal will be adhered into the groove of the lid before the pouring process begins. Now that we have the lid and the base separated and the lid pushed back away from the family, we can begin the process of installing the frigid imperial lowering device. But today is going to be just a little bit different. This funeral director prefers us to still use the old-fashioned rollers that we moved away from years ago. I'm not sure if there was a mishap with one of our newer lowering devices, or if he's just averse to change, but I prefer using the imperial lowering device's guide rails and safety bars rather than having the detachable rollers that sit above the frame. For safety reasons, when we set up for this funeral home, we place one roller on each end, and then we place our pistols and our guide bars at the exact same height as the rollers. So really the only difference on this setup is that we will not lower the casket down on to the safety bars. We will remove the safety bars and the casket will rest on top of the rollers. When the service has completed, I will need to lift one end of the casket slightly and pull those rollers out to the side, which is one of the reasons why I prefer not to use that style of roller. With the safety bars that we use for the imperial lowering device, we simply raise the casket up using the crank and easily remove the casket safety bars from each end. Once those are removed, the casket will be sitting on the blue straps, and the blue straps will lower the casket into the bottom of the burial vault. To remove the straps, we simply add a little bit of slack, and the raised ridges at the bottom of a Wilbert burial vault allow us to shimmy the straps out from each end of the casket with ease. The lowering device may then be removed and the lid pushed over the base raised into the lid where the seal is housed, and the burial vault will be sealed. After that, the lid carriers and the lid rails are removed and the burial vault is lowered to the bottom of the grave. The only step with lowering a burial vault after that is to remove the cables from our feet, and we do that by releasing one end of the cables down into the grave and using the crank to pull the cables out from the other end. When using the detachable rollers like I have to today, I leave the lowering device open just one click farther so that the detachable rollers sit nicely over the rails on the sides of the lowering device. Some of the rollers that are used rather than having the pistols, like this imperial lowering device, have clamps on the sides that help attach the rollers to the lowering device. Our rollers don't have that, so to avoid any malfunction, we leave our pistols attached and our guide bars attached to make sure that the casket can glide from the first set of detachable rollers to the second. This is kind of like a cross between using an old-fashioned lowering device that we no longer use and the new device at the same time. Either way, the safety of the casket is our number one priority. I posted a YouTube short earlier today where you can see what happens when a lowering device malfunctions when lowering a casket by itself down into a grave without a burial vault. It's a really tragic situation, and I've been doing this a long time. It's my goal to make sure that something like that never happens on a service that I'm on or a service that any of my coworkers or trainees will be on in the future. Losing a loved one is plenty hard. There's no reason that we should make anything harder on the family by not keeping up with our equipment or being negligent in general in the cemetery. This is the last step in the funeral process, and we should be sure that everything is functioning without issue and that we, as vault men, are respectful and caring to the families while they're present at the graveside. It is a beautiful day here in Central Illinois, so I went ahead and swung and completed the burial vault process first. It's now time to set our tent, carpets, and chairs. Since the road is so close to the setup today, I'm only going to be able to set my main frame tent, which is a 15 by 20 foot, 6-pole tent covering 12 committal service chairs. 12 chairs is our normal number, but more can be added for a service upon request. When setting a committal service tent, I angle each stake into the center of the tent and use the next stake to push back on the stake that I set before. This makes sure that all the tent poles have tension between them so that if a gust of wind comes underneath the tent, the poles don't have as much of an ability to lift up off the stakes. Another short that I posted today is what it's like to set a tent in 50 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts. Obviously I don't have that issue today, but some days you need every tip and trick in the book to get one of these tents up and make sure it's safe and stable for when the family arrives. There's barely any breeze today, so I won't be setting any walls, and it's pretty warm as well. So if it's warm out and there's no breeze, we don't set walls. When it's below around 50 degrees, we begin setting walls because if there is a breeze, we want to stop that breeze from entering the tent. But if it's hot and super windy, we will still set walls to make sure that the chairs aren't blowing over and that the tissues aren't flying everywhere, and so the family can hear the preacher with ease. Using a 6-pole tent is more difficult than using a 15 by 15 foot 4-pole tent. The center poles need to be lined up perfectly or it will throw off the entire angle in which the tent is sitting. And with the road right there at the edge of my tent poles, staking it that direction isn't possible, so I need to make sure everything is perfectly straight. Otherwise, I'll have to go back and move almost every single pole. Which today I still had to go back and move 2 of them because the tent was leaning to one side. As with everything in this job, safety is our number 1 priority, making sure that there is no danger of a family member being injured at one of our graveside services. The tent top has a banner that faces the side that the family will be entering the cemetery in procession, and we have a banner for each of the dozens of funeral homes that we provide our vault services for. The main top hooks on each of the 4 corners, and then there are 2 straps on each corner and 2 straps for the middle pole, making sure that this tent top can't lift away from the corners. In between the straps, it has hooks, just to try to keep the tent stable and make sure that the flaps aren't whipping around in the wind. To raise the tent, we use the top extension pieces, which has 6 poles that attach to 6 extensions that hook in to the corners and the middle of the tent frame. We prop up the main top and then attach the 4 corners and then the 2 middle poles. Once all the poles are in, we can go around and attach all the hooks to the frame and make sure that the flaps on the corners are velcroed together so that all the tent flaps stay down, even if there is a decent wind. A lot of the new hires assume that the tent is the easy part of the job and that setting the vault is much more difficult. But for some reason, a few weeks into the job, a lot of times, no matter how hard they try, they can't find a way to set the tent up straight, and if it's windy, they can't find a way to get the tent corners over the corner of the frame. And one of the reasons that I make these videos is so that I can tag the new hires in them and help them out whenever they have a problem with a certain aspect of the burial vault industry. Now, as you can see here, my tent was leaning to the left, so rather than picking up all 3 poles on the back side, I can remove one of the poles and angle it the way that I need the tent to go, and it will angle both the other frame poles as well. It does not sound like rocket science, but once you're hands-on out in the cemetery, setting a tent like this can be a little bit overwhelming, especially when the family's safety is at stake. On every service, we set 12 chairs with 12 chair covers. We have Wilbert blue chair covers, gray tri-guard covers, and dark blue sunset funeral home covers. We also have patriotic themed chair covers that we use for services for those who have served in one of our armed services. Some funeral directors love them, some don't, but all the feedback I've gotten from family is strictly positive. They're dark blue chair cover with American flag style designs on the sides. Now that this committal service is set, it's time for the final details, working on the vault and making sure that the service is ready to go for the family. On this Wilbert Continental, each handle has 2 screws. Some of the screws are plastic push-in screws, and some are bolts that we use to maneuver the vault lid around the shop by chains. Once the handles are attached, I can move on to setting the trademark, and each burial vault gets a trademark, all besides the concrete grave liner. The trademark just identifies which vault it is that the family receives, and they can check to make sure they got exactly what they chose at the funeral home. The trademark always goes towards the foot end of the vault. Cemeteries in central Illinois and Indiana, where I'm working today, are mostly laid out in an east to west fashion, with the feet to the east and the head to the west. This is mostly due to biblical scripture, but it also helps the cemetery stay organized, keeping all the vaults facing the same direction. The nameplate also goes towards the foot end of the vault. We have silver, copper, and gold nameplates, but if the vault is custom painted, we also, at times, will spray paint the nameplate to color match with the vault. The emblem goes at the head end of the vault, and we have a dozen or so standard emblems like this wreath, a rose, a cross, a crucifix, a palm leaf, and so on, but we can custom make an emblem to just about any subject matter you could think of. Those are decals that are printed out and placed on a 1 foot by 1 foot stainless steel sheet that is adhered onto the vault where the emblem normally goes. Depending on how many tissues I have with me, I normally set 12 tissues, 1 for each chair. If I'm running low, I will put 1 on each end of both rows. In the wintertime, we also have lap blankets and heaters that we'll set out to try to make the family as comfortable as possible. And this is what a Wilbert Continental set up and ready to go for service looks like. The vault suspended in full view above the grave, with the lowering device in place to make it easy for the pallbearers to simply set the casket on the first roller, and it will glide safely across the lowering device. Now when the procession arrived, they arrived in style. A classic hearse with at least a half dozen classic cars in procession, as well as some beautiful floral arrangements for the cemetery. Take care. God bless.